Hello, everybody. Let's see. Let me check the chat. All right, there are people here. See Farah, Raluca, Sophie, Jennifer, Sophie in Montreal, Jennifer in London. What's up, everybody? Welcome. Good to have you all here. And I'm excited for our workshop today. This is a topic, you're here, so you know this, but a topic that is an important one that can be a challenge and one that I think a lot of researchers and designers, definitely including myself, have figured out how to do by trial and error, maybe some running into those presentations and stakeholder meetings where we're trying to refine how we talk about our research. I'm pumped to get into this workshop. I scheduled a little extra time at the end to show you a cool thing that I'm working on to get your feedback on related to this, to take some questions. So we're going to take our time through everything and make sure that you guys leave here feeling confident to present and get some action on those research findings and studies that you're doing. So let's get into it. My name's Joe. I'm the design advocate at Lyssna. I've been a product designer, researcher for over 10 years, and I've worked on a little bit of everything. And I try to bring often that experience, and especially today with talking about presenting your work, research findings, dealing with lots of different clients and stakeholders that I have over the years. My goal is to bring that into these workshops, bring that experience in, and also hear from you guys and pull you guys for your opinions, thoughts, experiences, things you've run into, and keeping it practical and related to what all of us are doing every day as researchers, designers, and product people. No matter what topic we are talking about, my goal in creating workshops, teaching them, facilitating them is for you guys to leave with some real tangible skills, some new confidence, things that are going to really apply to your day-to-day work, not just theoretical stuff from more kind of like academic aspects of research, even though that is often folded into it and an important part. My goal is to always make some time and, or if not all the time, dedicated to things that you guys can put into practice and that are going to make you better at what you do each day. All right, ready to get started, everybody. Why is presenting research so challenging? Our workshop today, how to effectively present research to stakeholders. You go out, you do research, you learn a bunch of stuff, and then it's time to share that. When I say presenting as well, not talking about necessarily a specific type of presentation or a PowerPoint, which it could be, or a fig jam. It could be something that's more informal, comes in a lot of shapes and sizes, but the basic idea is that you're taking that stuff, the research you did, the findings, the things that came back, the results, and sharing them. And as you probably know, since you're here today, that can be pretty challenging. So let's break that down a little bit more. Let's start with a really tough question: why they can't make dinos not extinct anymore. I'm going to lead off with my son Henry, a 3-year-old. If any of you've had toddlers before, you get a lot of questions like this one. And the reason why I'm sharing this question about that I got, I don't know, a couple weeks ago about why we can't make dinosaurs not extinct anymore is because it feels a lot like what it feels like sometimes to present research findings to stakeholders. You get a question that involves a lot of details, context, and maybe not the attention span or the time or the level of engagement that you really need to fully explain that. There's a lot, let's say there's a lot to unpack there in why we can't make dinos not extinct anymore. Yeah, can't show him Jurassic Park yet, but he knows what it is. But that will really break his brain when he sees that maybe it is possible. Here's a project that I worked on a long time ago now at this point. It was a test prep app that I designed and did a lot of testing for a client. And one of the things that we did here were a ton of usability tests, and they were really long. They were really in depth. We were starting with a brand new product and learning a lot about how students used it to study and prepare for the GMAT. So I was running lots and lots of long, really extensive, moderated usability studies on this prototype I created for a test prep quiz builder thing. This was the best video I could find of it, but you get the idea. After doing and running, conducting those studies, there, as you could imagine, there was a lot that came back. Some of these were 40 minutes, 35 minutes, recordings, transcripts, follow-up questionnaires, lots of quotes, lots of good clips and highlights or lowlights. Just like all the research that you guys are doing day to day, a lot of stuff to unpack and tons of fig jams like this with different call outs, quotes, and this messy but very valuable information that came back from it. And then I met with the client after that. And I remember I did 2 full weeks of these. I really packed in a lot of these usability studies. So I had a ton of updates when it came time for that next client or stakeholder meeting to share what happened. And I got pretty much this question, right? Like, all right, Joe, what happened? What did you find out in these past 2 weeks? And I felt a lot like trying to answer Henry's question about dinos, where it's like, basically like, where do I even start, right? We got this 30-minute Zoom call and I have 50,000 fig jams and quotes and recordings and transcripts. And where do we begin with this? How do I even start if you weren't there to actually conduct those? So it's a lot to unpack. Presenting research is challenging. As we know as researchers, that the findings, the things that we uncover from any type of study that we're doing, they can be complex, they're nuanced, it can be an overwhelming amount of information. And maybe when you're in it and actually conducting the research or involved with every aspect of it, it's more clear or digestible, or you have your finger on the pulse of that. But when you really step back and look at what can come out of even a relatively simple research study, there's a lot there, just like our dinosaur question, a lot to unpack in a short amount of time. Now, what compounds with that and makes it even more challenging is that you're often presenting your research findings to stakeholders or team members who probably aren't as familiar with maybe the research process in general, or how research factors into the UX design process. And even if they are familiar with that and understand the overall process, if they weren't involved in the research, doing it every day, like you were refreshing those Lyssna studies to see the results, actually talking to people and conducting those usability studies, even if they're well versed in the purpose of research and the process and the role that it plays in product design, there's still a lot of context and things that they miss just by being out of the loop or not doing that research on their own. So you have a lot to unpack for an audience that might have mixed familiarity with research in general and probably much less so context than you do as the person who was leading it or conducting it. Another reason that maybe you guys have experienced as well that makes presenting research challenging is that there's pressure for results, right? And this is not across all organizations. I'm generalizing here, but a lot of times when presenting to stakeholders or maybe product managers in certain aspects, the idea is to get to new improved product, new features, launching things, improving things, fixing bugs, making experiences better, improving outcomes, improving business goals. Heavy emphasis on output and getting it to not just a research study that lives in a bunch of fig jams and recording transcripts, but actually pushing those to real actionable improvements. And as I'm sure a lot of you have experienced, research can often be seen as a detour to that. It can be seen as this vague, intellectual, curiosity driven endeavor where you're asking lots of questions, digging, talking to people, running studies, but never really using that or never making the connection. Maybe your stakeholders are never making the connection to how that actually gets to the things that they care about, right? Like launching new features that are going to improve user and business goals. So research is have that uphill battle of trying to combat the output, the focus on output and production, and making that connection between how the research might not speed up just the overall output, but is going to make that better, that output better and more valuable and more considered. Let me know in the chat if you who's felt this before, where it's I don't even know how to describe it. It's just a feeling of what do we there's a kind of the constant question when you're the one doing research, maybe from team or stakeholders, it's like, what are we going to do with this? Where's the end of this research journey? What is the output going to be? What is the answer to this question? What should we build next? Let's that pressure to speed it up. Let's make a decision. Let's see. Information for the sake of information isn't appreciated as it should be. Yes. And so what? Good. Lean with the 100. Yes. All right. So I didn't think I'd be alone with that one. You got what's the big win? Good one, Nick. What am I supposed to do with all of this? Jennifer, your comment, your chat is a perfect segue into this. Information for the sake of information isn't appreciated as it should be. Fully agree. How you communicate and present affects whether or not your work makes an impact. It would be a great thing if our research spoke for itself and we could just say, here's what happened. Check out these results. Yeah, I know, pretty impressive. Let's make it happen. Let's put this into action. Let's improve this part of the process. Let's dive deeper into this. But unfortunately, that's not the case. The way you present it is important. And if that's not a skill that you're practicing or you don't have a process for doing that, then all that good research goes into a folder like this, old research stuff. It goes to waste. But if you do it well and can communicate, if you have high quality research and can communicate that effectively to stakeholders, team members, whoever your audience is, that's going to lead to better decisions. That's going to lead to action. And that's going to lead to more buy-in on the research process in general. If you have team members or stakeholders who are maybe not skeptical about research, but see it as this is a long path. Why don't we just focus on building stuff? And you can really demonstrate and communicate it well to them, and they can see the results. They can see the impact of research. They can see a bad decision, a bad product decision that they narrowly avoided, maybe because of the research that you did. That's not only going to help with the actual decisions and the product decisions that you're making, it's going to help build overall confidence in the impact of research and the important role that it plays. Maybe to some of your team members who haven't fully made that connection or don't have that full buy-in just yet. Expect something quantitative. Oh yeah, we're going to get into all the stories. Yes, correct, Amber. Okay, so we hear this a lot, fighting for resources. I say this all the time too. As researchers, you want to do research, you know that you hit a certain point, maybe if even as a designer, where you're like, I'm really winging it, or I'm basing this on assumptions, or I'm really relying heavily on what our competitive product does. We really need to talk to some people and figure this out. We really need to test this. We really need to put this in front of people. And that can be an uphill battle to make that case to stakeholders. Hey, I need 2 weeks to stop designing stuff, stop building stuff, stop output, and let's take a little time. Let's take a budget. Let's pump the brakes a little bit and actually ask people, validate, make sure the thing we're doing is right. That can be hard to do. And a lot of times, as you see here, we consider that like fighting for resources. And what I want to highlight is, yes, it is important to be persistent and to make your case for research and to make time and budget for it. But just another way of thinking of it is to prove the impact. That's an easier route in some ways and a more sustainable route rather than just trying to push for research. Think about it as, how can we prove the impact of it? How can I start to show these stakeholders so they can see for themselves that the research I'm doing is not just some mysterious process that I go off and do for a couple weeks, but something that is going to lead to improvements, improvements to metrics in the things that they care about, improvements to the product, better decisions. So thinking of that as, yes, you got to always scratch and claw, I guess, a little bit for your resources and budget and time, but thinking about more effective ways, actually proving the impact, showing what can happen. And in the way you present your work and findings is a really big factor and a really good starting point in doing that. Okay, so we're going to look at some of the key steps of a good stakeholder presentation. I made this really simple scenario here that I'm going to use as an example. Imagining that we're product designers or researchers at Airbnb. We've conducted some moderated usability studies on the checkout process of someone booking a place on Airbnb. We observed users as they browsed, selected a place, and went through the checkout and payment process. And now we have hours of recording, feedback, quotes, screen recordings, all that stuff. So a pretty simple research scenario here, pretty general, but we're going to use this one kind of throughout the workshop to provide some examples of some of the things to do and that you want to convey in presenting this, and some of the common mistakes or stuff that you want to avoid. So now, time to present those findings to your team. All right, this example, again, is pretty simple, but what we're going to talk through here is a process, or really 3 steps that we're going to dive into that are going to apply to just about any presentation of research findings. Again, like I said a little earlier, doesn't matter what the format of the presentation is, if it's something more informal, very formal PowerPoint presentation to your whole team, all of this stuff is going to apply. It doesn't really matter what type of research you're doing, if it's a bunch of card sorts and tree tests to redesign your navigation, or if it's something more open-ended or exploratory, like interviews or usability studies where you have a lot of quotes and qualitative data. It's going to apply to all of those. So I set that Airbnb one up as a general reference that we'll look at, but the key steps that we're going to cover here, setting the stage, focusing on the right stuff, and making it stick, these are going to apply to any subject matter, any research study, and any scenario where you're tasked with effectively relaying and conveying that to your team. So we're going to go through each of these. Let's start with set the stage. It's time to present. Let's take our Airbnb example. What happened in these usability studies where we observe people go through the browsing and checkout flow? Okay, so first part, setting the stage. Like I said earlier, no matter how good or insightful your research is, it's not going to speak for itself. And how you start your presentation, how you open it up, can make the difference, but really can be make or break for everything that you're going to share after it. If, regardless of the quality of your research or the really valuable findings and insights and decisions you can make from it, even if all of that is the same, how you frame it and how you set the stage and kind of start out the presentation is going to really be a make or break factor on if it's well received, if it's acted on, if it actually has legs and momentum beyond that meeting, or if it goes into that old research stuff folder that I showed earlier, or if it's overwhelming, if it's ignored, if it's a nice presentation, but nothing happens after it. So how you open it up, how you set the stage in a presentation really sets the tone for everything else. All right, so let's just I'll put a minute on the clock in the chat. Just give me off the top of your head, what's the point of setting the stage? Or if you want to answer it in another way, what information do we want to include? If you take our Airbnb example, we ran our usability studies on that browsing and checkout flow. We've got all this feedback and data and quotes and transcripts back. And we're going to present all the main stuff in a little bit, but What are the things we want to include in the opening? When we're setting the stage, what do we want to convey to set ourselves up for a good presentation as we get into all the nitty-gritty stuff? Take a second, drop it in the chat, take a guess, give me your thoughts, and we'll take a look at those in a sec, and then keep going. Yes, great answers in here. Good, good stuff. Enda said demystifying the research methodology. Not every stakeholder will understand how the research works, why we would do it. Good. Nick, study context for stakeholders, hypothesis, objective of study, purpose of the research, what problem, what impact it has for the user and business. Let's see, Jennifer said what the problem was and why it's important for us to do the research for the business. Good. What was tested, with whom, explain the main goal, how the payment process works, right? Giving a little background in it. Why did we do this in the first place? What is the hypothesis that we had? Excellent. I think you could sum all of these answers up in the chat as, yeah, I think Sophie, or I guess Sophie's quoting Nick here. Why did we do this in the first place? What's the hypothesis we had? And the overall goal being giving them the context and getting them on board with this research from the beginning, right? I think a good way to gauge if you're doing this, if you do this well, is if you're looking at, let's say on a video chat, your team's reaction. If it's like this, leaned in by the time, okay, now I'm going to share the results of this usability study. If everyone's leaning in and listening and seeing engaged, right? That's a good sign. That probably means you did a good job of setting this up. They probably understand the context of it. They understand what's the overall executive summary of this research. And more importantly, as many of you mentioned, they understand why it matters, right? This is not just a fun little study or interview that we did to explore some things. This has a direct correlation on stuff that me as a product manager, I care about, like conversion rates or increased satisfaction, those big goals. So agreed. Great answers in the chat. Setting the stage in a more general way is giving them that context to get them on board, providing some background and goals. As many of you said, why did you do this research? Maybe sharing the method. What did you do? What were a high level summary of the study, what you asked people about, what part of the product you were testing, what flow you wanted to evaluate, giving them the context they need to understand what this looked like and why you did it in the first place. And then number 3, as many of you mentioned here, connecting to opportunity and impact. Why does this matter? We're going to get into this a little bit more as we get into some of the other sections, but setting it up from the beginning that, hey, the stuff that we were asking about, the research we were conducting, the things that I'm going to dive into in this presentation have an impact on things that you as a founder, you as someone in a business analyst role or product management role actually care about. So giving them the context they need to follow along and getting them on board with the importance and the impact and what can be done and achieved with this research. A very common mistake that I have definitely made is too much, too fast, right? Let me know in the chat if you've ever done this. Maybe I definitely did in the earlier stages of my career when presenting. Jumping right in, right? Starting with data, charts, quotes, results, maybe giving a little context, but going too fast into the important aspect of the presentation, what you learned from it, what people were saying. It's easy for us as researchers to tunnel vision and jump to that and spend more time getting into the real meat of the presentation. But you have to remember, for your audience, it's not going to be impactful for them. It's not going to be juicy research data that they can use if they don't really understand or aren't fully on board with the reason for it, with the setup, with the signals or triggers that initiated this research in the first place, with the opportunities that can be seen from the results of this research. Super common mistake, too much, too fast. My best advice here would be to remember that think about how much context you have, especially if you're the person who actually conducted the research and did those interviews or usability studies, you have a massive amount of context that your team members don't. And by giving them that, it's really going to change how they view and how engaged they are with the actual important findings that come later on. Lucas said, oh yeah. So this is we're going to look at a more detailed one towards the end of class, but going back to our Airbnb example here, right? We have our research, pretending this is our presentation, research study recap, key findings and takeaways from our recent round of moderated usability tests. I made this one super, super simple just to give you the idea. Background and research goals. We saw a trend of users browsing, selecting a place, and then dropping off in the checkout flow, especially after seeing their price breakdown and before confirming payment. We wanted to understand why this was happening, whether it was product related, environmental, or otherwise. We conducted 25 moderated usability studies. Participants were given the task of browsing and booking the place, and we observed them as they moved through the flow. These, again, sample graphics here, but impact and opportunity. By understanding user motivations and decision-making factors related to booking, we can identify the friction points that are causing drop-off. Improving these areas will help create a smoother experience and increase booking conversion. So a very general example here, but I wanted to keep it super simple to just show you guys how really little you need to make a big difference and provide that context and set yourself up for success. I did it as a light version with all these slides, but if you read through it, they have all of the aspects that we just mentioned and that many of you mentioned in the chat, right? What are we looking at here? The checkout flow. What inspired this research, or what was the signal to dig deeper into this? A drop off at different parts of the booking process. What are the opportunities? A smoother experience, better user experience, increased conversion rates, relating it back to business goals, right? Giving a high level overview of the study without too much detail. This is a pretty light setting the stage, but it would still be very effective in kind of setting up the context, and certainly a lot better than jumping right into the nitty gritty of what happened in those 25 usability studies that you did. When it comes to setting the stage and providing that information, one of the main pieces of advice I would give is don't phone it in, meaning don't treat it as an afterthought, right? Remember that it's one of the most important things you can do to ensure that your findings are going to resonate and stick. It's simple. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. It certainly doesn't need to dive into every aspect of the study and the results. But if you can communicate the reason for the research, the high level goals and what you're trying to learn from it, the impact and the opportunity, and any of that necessary context, that's going to make a huge difference. I wouldn't say spend all of your time, if you're preparing a research presentation, you want to make sure that you're covering every area of it and certainly getting into those findings and next steps that we'll talk about, but making sure that you're really spending some time and understanding the importance of the setup. Even a simple one is going to be effective in really helping every other aspect of your presentation, and ultimately getting those research findings to turn into action and good decisions rather than just being lost to time. Let me pause for a second there. If anyone's got any questions, otherwise we'll move on to our next one. While I'm waiting for any questions in the chat, I'll say a lot of this idea of not phoning it in or actually practicing it, I think about beginner UX and research courses that I've taught. And when we do practice user interviews, a lot of students who are doing it for the first time, one of the most common mistakes I'll see is them breeze through the intro, right? They're focusing so much on their interview questions, focusing so much on the follow-up questions and the timing of the actual interview they're conducting, that a lot of times they forget to do, or at least have a plan or a practice of Hey, I'm Joe. I'm the researcher for this. Today I'm going to be asking you some questions about XYZ. We want to get your honest thoughts and opinions. And when it comes time to actually do the interview, they're not prepared for that part. That leads to a little bit of maybe like awkwardness or discomfort early on, and it can change the vibe of the interview. Similar thing here, right? It's not the core part of this presentation. The findings and the next steps are really that, but it's something that can be easily overlooked and then change the vibe of it or change how well received everything after it is from there. Rachel, UX student here. Any tips for presenting artifacts for case studies that won't confuse people? Yes, is a good question. Let me save this one so I can come back to it later. But my short answer for that is you really have to summarize and provide the artifact in most cases, right? I would say shouldn't speak for itself. If you are showing thinking of a research artifact like I don't know, card sort results, right? Like a similarity matrix. I'm trying to think of a really dense one that an outsider is going to have a hard time like understanding on first glance. It's less about it's having a prepared summary and a prepared overview really of what that artifact is showing, what the finding that you're pulling out of that is. So even if you're not shortening it or like simplifying the artifact itself, you want to make sure that you have a clear way of presenting it or talking about it or putting it on a slide with 3 bullet points that are going to direct people to the key aspects of what they're looking at, to the main finding that came out of it. So really the idea is not to rely, affinity map, that's a perfect one, right? So if you're showing an affinity map and someone sees all these post-its and different quadrants and all this information, that's going to be hard for them to digest no matter how familiar they are with affinity maps or the research. It's not about necessarily simplifying the artifact. You can show, here's the full thing, right? Here's the full affinity map we created out of this. But you want to make sure you're saying, here are the big themes that came out of it. Here are the things that are most related to our research goal. Here are the things that popped up that we didn't expect that might be worth digging into more. So it's less about changing the artifact, more about practicing and breaking down how you talk about it and what specifically you want to highlight in it. And then just showing the artifact to make it available if they want to deep dive into it further. Let me know if that helps, Rachel. All right, hopefully. Next one. We've set the stage properly. Now we're going to get into the actual findings. Again, a general or like a larger section of your research presentation, but this is where we're going from context into here's what actually happened in the study. Here are the findings, the insights, here's what came back. So when you're presenting your findings, the goal is to clearly and concisely communicate what we learned and what to take action on. Now, the challenge with this, as we've talked about plenty, is how to do this clearly and concisely. Those are the key words there, right? How to do this when you have 50 interview transcripts, post-it notes everywhere, and a ton of stuff that you need to whittle down. What does it look like to share your findings effectively? I want you to share in the chat, how do we, maybe to make more specific, right? How do we cut down on what we're sharing? How do we take all of that data and those results and quotes and transcripts? How do we take that and effectively share the important parts or share it in a brief, concise presentation and strike that balance? So, in the chat, what does it look like? What tips do you have for sharing it effectively? I'll give you guys a minute on that. Drop your thoughts, quick answers in the chat, and we'll take a look at some examples. If you want to think about this a different way, what does it look like to not do? What's the wrong way to do this? Summary, main conclusions, action points. Jennifer said, using the language that people in the business speak and understand. Awesome. Trying to show a little quant if they're numbers people, even in a qual project. Jennifer, there are some chats that I see that I'm just like, I know whoever's writing that chat, in this case, you, Jennifer, you're in it. You're speaking from experience with the adding some quantitative stuff if there are numbers people, even though it's a qualitative study. Yep, been there before. Nick said commonalities, difference shared by multiple results. What findings align closest with your hypothesis? Nice. Sophie said, share what stood out, maybe one or two quotes from testers to emphasize. Good. Yeah, excellent. Nick, you're, I don't know, 3 for 3 on answers so far, but really good stuff in the chat. So when we're sharing our findings, or like generally what came out of this research, our job is not just to summarize it, not definitely not to just regurgitate what happened or copy paste it, but to curate and prioritize. If we want to share these effectively, we know we can't share everything that came back in our research study, or every single play by play detail of this Airbnb usability study. So it's our job not to just say what happened. We have to go a step further, not just to summarize or cut it down, but to really emphasize the stuff that is high impact, high priority. And as Nick said, the findings that align closely to our hypothesis, the findings that are going to most affect what we're testing, the decisions that we're making after. Now, the natural issue with this, as we said, is that you might feel as a researcher, you're leaving things out, right? It's not easy to go through a bunch of research findings and see something and say, oh, that can just disappear. It never even happened, that quote or that piece of feedback. You look at it and you think everything has some value or ties into the themes or the overarching insights in one way or another. And that can make it hard to cut things out and hard to say these are the most important things and everything else we're just not even going to mention. So the idea here is we want to emphasize the high impact, high priority findings, things that are closely related to our hypothesis, our goals, and then for the rest, keeping it available, but not letting it compete for attention. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So the idea is not to just completely cut it down from 100 things to 3 things. The idea is to focus on the most high priority, high impact findings, things that are going to be actionable, things that are going to resonate with your stakeholders, and then still being able to have the rest of that, the more maybe less related or kind of supplemental research findings available and potentially useful in the future, or to dig back into with these decisions. Most common mistake, really similar to the opening one, information overload. If everything is a priority, then nothing is. I would say this is the most common mistake. Another one that I've made plenty of times over, overwhelming your audience, right? Sharing too much, or by not organizing your findings clearly, dumping everything onto a slide like this. Key findings, slide 1 of 56. One of 156, right? They might all be important, and you might be able to walk through every single one of these findings as a researcher and say why this connects to our research goal, the decisions we're making. But the bottom line is that if you're sharing all of those, it's going to be very hard to rein in the focus, the attention, and the engagement of your audience as to what's worth pursuing. Some better examples here. Key findings, 19 of 25 users said the final price was more than expected. Some said it might push them over budget or make them reconsider booking. So we have another simple example here, but a good one. We're focusing on a finding from this fictional usability study where we have a pretty convincing metric that 19 of 25 users. It's related to a key aspect of the checkout process, which is like the confirmation page. It's related to our goal of decreasing drop-off and increasing conversions, and it's high stakes, right? Some said it might push them over budget or make them reconsider booking. So we're finding out that right at the last second, people are seeing these fees for the Airbnb they're about to book, and it's more than expected, and it's not causing a great reaction, and probably in a lot of cases causing them to drop off. This would be a very good finding to highlight in the presentation we've set up here. It's related to our goals. It's pretty convincing, and it's certainly something that seems like it has some implications if you were to improve it, to improve some of those business goals. And again, things that your stakeholders, your audience are going to tune in for. 67% of users only notice rules or restrictions at the final step, cause friction, reevaluation, or a decision not to complete the booking. So again, we see something that's relatively convincing in terms of the number of people. We're seeing it at a key point where they are about to book and then see something like it's not pet friendly or something like that, and a high impact of them dropping off at a key point. So both these have a clear tie-in to user drop-off. They impact business and user goals, and they share a common theme, right? Like unexpected things that come up right before I click checkout. If there could be tons of other feedback about the colors of buttons, the typography, the photos that are shown. You guys have done this before, you know, all the stuff that comes back. But if in our fictional scenario here, these would be two that I would say are front runners for presenting as key findings, closely related to the business, closely related to the research goal, and have a clear impact on the business goals and user satisfaction. Okay, so I mentioned this before, but what about everything else, right? If you're picking and a few things, really your top findings or insights or themes to highlight, the ones that are really most closely related to those business goals, high impact research goals, you still are going to have a whole lot left over that you don't want to disappear. So the idea is to make that accessible, right? To say, here, there's a place if you want to dig more into the feedback people had about the listing page on Airbnb. If you want to actually watch these interviews and see what people had to say and see their surprised faces when the fees were higher than they expected, that is all here, right? The idea is to keep that available to dig into, both for yourself as a researcher and your stakeholders, but to shift it into the background so you can focus on these key findings. The idea being what we said earlier, if everything is presented and everything's dumped out there for your stakeholders to digest, it's going to be difficult to really prioritize or take action on that. One of my favorite features of Lyssna, we're going to look at this shortly too, but this share results feature. When you run a Lyssna study, you have all our results here. This is from an old workshop of testing a babysitter onboarding flow. You can see there's a lot here. I would not want to share this as just my research report. However, the share results button, nice link. I'll put this in the chat here so you guys can check it out. Really nice way to be able to say, to include in a research presentation and say, here are the main things. We're going to focus on the highest impact stuff. But if you want to dig into everything, if you're an ambitious product manager who wants to get your hands dirty with some research, you can see it all here. Also, if we have a discussion, a conversation about these findings, and maybe we need a little bit more context, or we want to dive into something or verify something in the research, we can go back here. So making it available and accessible is a great way to say it's all here, but let's focus on, here's what I want to focus on, without feeling like you're cutting or disregarding some of this valuable research. So this is a great way to do it, but however you do it, the idea is to make it available, accessible, and shift it to the background for that presentation. All right, any questions on that before we get to our last one? And then I'm going to show you my prototype that I got going here, because I want to get your feedback on this. I set this workshop till 1:30, so it's another 35 minutes or so. So we're going to go through this next section in a couple minutes. I'll take some questions as well, and then I want to share this prototype, get your thoughts on it, and recap a couple of things we're talking about here. Let's see, any questions? Caitlin said, mix of fraction and percent when you present findings, both 69 out of 23 and 73% of participants. I would say, that's an interesting question. I would say what matters. So what I've seen before is with percentage, it can be misleading in a presentation if you have a really small sample size, or if they don't know, your stakeholders don't know the sample size. So if you were to say 9 out of 10, let's even make it more, right? 4 out of 5 participants did XYZ versus 80% of participants did the same thing. The percentage, the number of them isn't any different. But if you see 80% and you don't know that it was only 5 people who are part of the study, that's important. So I would say the main thing, I would say it doesn't really matter, but you want to make sure that you want to make sure that you're not obscuring the sample size. So if they know that, if I saw 4 out of 5, unless that had been agreed upon or it was explained as to why only 5 people tested it, my first question would probably be like, okay, how reliable? 4 out of 5 is 80%. That's good, but there's only 5 people. Whereas if I saw 80%, that's a little bit more biases you to say, oh, that's a lot. That's convincing. That's overwhelmingly convincing without really knowing the sample size. Good evening, bro. Any other questions? All right. That's an interesting question. Yeah. I've seen that with like beginner classes I've taught when I was teaching at General Assembly, and we do like our first round of students would do their first round of usability studies. And I'd see their reports would be like 90% of people, and be like, they test with whatever, 4 or 5 people. Yeah. Let me think about that one a little more. All right. Let's get on to our last part of our keys to a great research presentation. We've set the stage, given the context, got people on board with it. We've curated, focused, prioritized the findings that we want to present, the things that are high impact relative to our research, relative to our business goals, things that are going to get our audience to care about them. Now it's time to take it home and make it stick. So what happens next? This is what we said right at the top of the workshop. If you do everything else well, those first 2 parts, the end of your presentation is the home stretch, right? The thing that's going to determine a lot of times if your research gets used. Even if everything else is really compelling and they're on board from the start, your team is going to be thinking at the end, or after hearing those highlighted findings, what do we do next? Typically at the end of a research presentation, maybe we're offering some recommendations, some next steps, things that are going to tie up the findings and what was learned and move into where it goes from here. Tell me in the chat, what are some ways to make sure our research gets put into action? What are some things we want to do when ending our presentation, or talking about what's next, that are going to increase the likelihood that the momentum keeps up and that this research is used, rather than having that research and everything we presented kind of fade into our old research folder? Go ahead, drop that in the chat. You guys have had great responses to all of these so far. Take a minute, put your thoughts in the chat. We'll talk through this a little bit and then take some questions and share some other stuff before we wrap up. Nick, 4 for 4, 5 for 5, can co-teach this workshop anytime with me. Most of you can from these answers in the chat. Provide actionable next steps which stakeholders require ownership of those steps. Good. Nick the fire emoji. Like it. Tie conclusions back to the initial goals. Great, Chloe. And Chloe, that's a great answer. And I think a really important one that kind of gets back to all the emphasis around how you start the presentation and how you set the stage. It's not just about getting the attention or the engagement of your audience that you're presenting to, but you're setting up some important pillars of what this research is about and what you're going to do with it. So it's not just about getting everyone bought in and listening and tuned into it, but the things that you set up when you're setting the stage, the goals of the research, the opportunities that are going to come out of it, the impact it could have on your product. Those are going to be a huge factor in determining the findings that you're showing, like we just looked at, and also the next steps, right? All of those are going to be set up from those early context and goals of the research and how you articulate them. If something seems like a next step that's totally coming out of left field because you haven't mentioned it as a research goal, your team's not isn't familiar with why that would be important, that's going to make it a lot more difficult for you to get that buy-in and connection and the momentum that you need to put that into action. So really like that one. Prioritized recommendations can be helpful. Some stakeholders are looking to see low-hanging fruit solutions to get some rapid results. Awesome. So good answers across the board. Specific, actionable next steps, right? Those could be things that could be prioritized. I like that a lot. And I think also with recommendations or next steps, often they can be follow-up research, design directions, potential solutions. There are a lot of different varieties that those next steps can come in, or things that you want to do after this research. But the idea, as many of you said, to be specific and actionable. Most common mistakes, if you have no next steps, right? This is like the worst sin you can commit and the saddest, especially if you do a really good job of presenting your findings. If you just end it right there and say, okay, those are the big things we learned. The big floating question is going to be what's next, right? And if you're not providing some guidance on that, or providing recommendations or facilitating that with your team, it's going to be unlikely that that goes anywhere or goes in the right direction of how to use that research and take it beyond this study. The more common one, I would say, is vague next steps. Your research slowly will vanish away over the next few days. You might propose something like this. Okay, next steps after this Airbnb study, we saw a bunch of issues that I outlined about the checkout flow, the surprise fees at the end. Next, in the goal of improving this, let's conduct a competitive analysis of other checkout flows. Now, this is actually a good next step, right? If you wanted to compare your checkout flow and see maybe some of the other features or information or order of steps that other competitors are doing in their checkout flow, and identifying some areas of opportunity to improve yours, that's a good next step coming out of this based on the research. The problem is this is too vague. So what will happen if you present a next step like this is everyone listening will nod, be like, yeah, that sounds good. That sounds like what we should do next, right? And then you'll end that call and it will probably not maintain that momentum. Who's going to do it? What does that competitive analysis look like? What are we trying to gain from that? What is the goal here? What's the timeline for that, right? Now, not every single one of those things has to be presented or dictated right here in the presentation, but the idea is these vague next steps are sneakily killers of your research getting put into action, because they sound good on the call, especially right at the end of it when everyone's okay, I'm going to have lunch, and then difficult to pick up the momentum from there. Much better one would be, let's do a competitive research, choose 5 similar companies with comparable pricing structures, audit their checkout flows to see how they communicate fees and pricing transparency. Let's screenshot, document key patterns we might be able to steal into our flow and discuss next week. Again, just a made up example here, but way more specific. Let's scope this out. Let's look at 5 other competitors. Let's put it in a fig jam that we can all access. Let's meet in a week and figure out what are some design elements that our competitors are using that help with this price transparency thing. That is going to get momentum, especially if there's a responsibility or an assignment to someone on your team to do it. Another bad one, or too vague. Let's design a new order summary page based on the feedback. Better one, wireframe. Let's sketch out 5 ideas for a summary cart widget. Let's review and decide on one to test out in the next sprint. I don't know if that's the best next step from this or not, but the idea, more specific, much, much more likely that those findings are going to keep that momentum and are going to keep that momentum towards actually being an improvement in your product. You see, Chloe said, the problem I have with prioritization at the research stage is it will usually be overridden by scope and focus set by PMs. Yeah, that I think is to some of these extra tips here, Chloe, especially this one, like opening the floor to discussion and making or opening up a, let's say, collaborative space, whether that's a conversation, whether that's a fig jam, that there's room for discussion on coming out of these findings, right? Especially when you're talking about next steps. So prioritization at the research stage usually be overridden. So that I've had that happen before. So I understand it's not an easy answer for that one. But what I would say is making some room for these next steps here, right? Or the prioritization, or what should we focus on next? You don't have to fully or decisively dictate what those next steps are, what the priorities are. If there's a way to guide that conversation, right? Maybe saying something like, okay, here are some of the things I think are low-hanging fruit based on this, right? And those are all in a fig jam or somewhere where people can access them. Here's a couple questions we can ask ourselves to narrow this down a little bit further. What do you think about this? Out of these 2 features, what do you see as higher impact? It's creating some guidance and some like guardrails around that prioritization, and not just making it a yes or no thing on what's prioritized and what's next. Not saying that you're doing that, Chloe, and it can be tricky, but I've found that if you can provide some guidance, here's how I see the prioritization and what's next, here's why. Let's discuss this and frame that. That can lead to maybe a little more flexibility with PMs or people who are thinking more about scope or have other ideas for timelines and solutions. Feedback is very timely and useful. Good. Awesome. All right. So those are our big steps in here. We got setting the stage, focusing your findings that you're sharing, and making it stick. Want to open it up to any questions that you guys have. We'll take a minute or 2 for these. So go ahead and drop it in the chat, and then I'm going to share something I'm working on because I want to source a few of you volunteers as potential research participants for a very meta research study and product that I want to test out. Let's see. Mary said, I think the more those prioritized items can be proven via the great research you did, to impact the business or the project goals can potentially help with that as well. Yeah. And this can be a really good, if you can prove it from the more you can back those priorities up, the better. 100% agree, Mary. And then I would say like the last resort, right? If you run into really like a stalemate or a disagreement or a discussion that just keeps going in the same direction between, let's say, exploring feature A versus feature B, or need A versus need B that you found in the research. A good solution for that is you can probably recommend some really targeted research to get a definitive answer on that. Hey, look, we were debating between the priority of this versus this. You think that users care more about that. I think they care more about this. We both have some evidence that's it's not a slam dunk evidence one way or another. Hey, let's run a quick design survey. Let's run a quick prototype test with 10 people that's specifically focused on this. Now, that might not be the direction that or might be, you might want to get to a solution, a decision faster. Certainly your stakeholders probably will. But if that does come up, and even if you're able to prove it, there's always an opportunity to do a little bit more research to get maybe a more definitive answer on that, to agree with your team on, hey, let's run this study, and whatever happens out of this, let's use that to inform what we're prioritizing. And a lot of times if you're doing further research like this to make a more focused decision or learn about like this priority versus that, or this need versus that, research is usually pretty focused, and I don't want to say straightforward, but that's typically something that you can create a study for, launch, and if it's specific enough, get some pretty definitive answers back, right? You don't have to open up an entire other Pandora's box on a 2-month long research study. A lot of times that answer can be, hey, let's pause this on the priority. Let's run a quick study that's going to really get us an answer to this and revisit it in a week with a real answer. Let's see. How would you handle surprise findings? Something that came up by more than 75% of users, but was not in your original hypothesis. Do you pivot? It really depends on what that finding is. Something that came up not in your original hypothesis. I'm trying to think of an example for this one. If it's something that like totally invalidates an assumption that you have, a really core assumption that you had going into it, then you have to dig into it a little bit deeper, as painful as that might be. Yeah, I think it really just depends on like how much you want to get to the why of that, right? So if it was like, I don't know, a preference test, something simple, and you saw like a major surprise result, my first thought would be to think of a more concise study, or like a follow-up study that I could do to get more context around that or dive deeper into it. Basically see, is this a total earth-shattering revelation that's going to have to make us totally reconsider what we're talking about? Or is this something that that maybe introduces a new opportunity or problem to solve, but doesn't take us like totally off track? So I would want to just dig more into it depending on the study and see like the level of, it might be an overwhelming number of people who said something, but diving a little bit deeper into it to see like how severe that is, or like how much that could impact further research and design decisions. It's okay for hypotheses to be wrong too. That's a valuable learning in itself. Yeah, that's why we do research in the first place, for sure. Let's see. How do you handle findings that come up around 50% in research? Do you present it? That's funny, Jeanette. I'm going to answer that one, and then I'll show you guys. If you're still hanging around, I got a prototype to show you and some recruitment to do for you guys. But let's see, Jeanette, how do you handle findings that came up in around 50%? So finding that is pretty much like inconclusive. I'm thinking of, you're doing a this or that, right? And you're getting split 50%. Again, it depends on if you're judging it by, let's say, a preference test, A versus B, and you get 50% A, 50% respond to B. You would want to talk, that's an important finding to present, right? Now, you don't get to say, oh, it was a slam dunk for A or B, but you're saying if we're just going on the numbers, it was inconclusive. It was 50-50. So the way I would talk about presenting this is thinking about, how do you, from here, right? How do we get an answer for that? let's say the preference test was A versus B, and you also had a question after it that said, why did you choose the one that you chose? And there's a bunch of responses for that. Then your answer might be they were 50-50, but looking into the next step, let's look into the reasons people gave for choosing it. Let's see if there's any decisions we can make that combine the best aspects of A and B. Let's see if there are like common threads, maybe common characteristics of the user. Oh, everyone who chose A was a student. Everyone who chose, or most of the people who chose B were in the early stages of their career, right? So looking for things to dive into more about the why, but if that's an important metric and it's a split, it'd be important to present. The key is you want to present not just, hey, it was 50-50. You want to present, it was 50-50. Here's how we're going to get what we're going to do next to get the answer to that question or to dive deeper into that. Research pivot. I'm calling up my insights and recommending next steps to research. Let's see if I missed anything here. Okay, Christopher, let's see what you got. Do you recommend, I'm going to answer yours, Christopher, and then I'm going to wrap up here in the next 5-10 minutes. So if you guys want to hang on. Do you recommend that when it comes to trends, the data be very brief, like a single slide to explain them? In the case of quantitative data, is it better to use a dashboard, maybe from Tableau or Excel? When it comes to trends, I would say there's a pretty similar answer that I gave to, let's see, I think it was, I forget who asked before about sharing like research deliverables and artifacts. It depends, first of all, your audience and who you're presenting to. But the idea is, my main answer is making it easy to digest and not overwhelming, right? So if there's a trend like I don't know, maybe like some analytics or quantitative stuff, trying to get it into a single slide, I think that's a good benchmark, right? So even if the data that you're showing, the quantitative stuff, whether that's simple or complicated, you want to have that summary or the key thing to pull out of it prepared for your audience, not relying on them to interpret it for themselves. So if you have a dashboard, that can work fine. But if you're showing a dashboard with lots of metrics, trends, data, analytics, research data, whatever it is, that can be a fine way to present it. But you have to make sure that whether you're talking about it, putting a summary in the slide, putting some notes on it, that you are directing your audience on what to focus on. Here's everything. Here's some of the things that matter. I'd say my main point, it's different for any scenario, but my main piece of advice for how to present it visually is the worst thing is making it overwhelming, right? So I'm not going to say cut it down to one slide or one number or be that rigid, but the idea is main thing you want to avoid is showing a slide, a dashboard, whatever, and having your audience look at it and say, what am I supposed to be seeing here? What is this telling me about this research that you did or this product decision that we have to make? All right, cool. Let me share this with you guys. First thing I'm going to do, we're going to wrap up in 5 minutes, you guys. So I know we had a little longer workshop today, but if you feel like hanging around, hang around. First thing, I'm going to put this is a promo code to get 20 free credits from Lyssna. It's got the link in there. Let me make sure this link is correct. Yes, it is. Cool. I'll share that in a sec. But if you guys did want to claim some free credits to do some testing and build on some of the momentum from today, that is there before I forget. All right, I'll show you this quickly, but here's something I'm working on, which is a kind of a little prototype to turn your Lyssna study results into a well-formed stakeholder presentation in a couple clicks. So the reason I'm showing this to you guys is because I want to get your feedback on it. So I'm going to just walk through it real quick, but eventually in the next week or so, I want to share this with a small group of you guys, who are here for this, and let you try it out. I want to run a Lyssna study to get your feedback on it. And mainly, I want you guys to stress test this and see how it works with your own studies. Because I've been doing a lot of it with a lot of demo studies and trying to refine it. But I think soon it'll be ready for some real action. So let me just I'll show you how it works. And in the chat, if you're interested and you want me to share this usability test and this link and let you be basically a beta tester of it, just let me know in the chat and I'll get your name down and email you the link when it's time to share. But this is what I built. So I have this study here, again, an old one that walks through a onboarding flow to sign up for a babysitting app. And we have some questions based on the sign up process. How confident are you? And then we have a bunch of responses down here about what made them feel confident or not confident that they were going to find a qualified babysitter. So let me show you how this works. We'll see. Lovable's had some major bugs today, but let's see if it works. So the idea is you can paste that share URL in, gets the study. This is the part that hasn't been working for me. All right, hold on. Give me a sec here. Hold on. Lovable keeps having errors. Hold on. Let's check it out. Let's try this. Let's do skip this step. Okay. Here, I'll run it back. Okay, so the idea is you can paste your study link, and then there are some questions. Lovable's had some issues today, so I don't know why it's not loading, but it will ask you some context questions around it, and then create pretty much a research report right here. Can you guys see this? Yeah. Take this off. Take this promo code, thinks it's not in the way. So what I'm trying to get it to is where you can just paste those results in and it will generate a report for you. I didn't get to add the context to this one because it seems like it's not working on Lovable, but it's pulling out all the stuff that we've just discussed for the past hour and a half. Background and context, we evaluated a new onboarding flow for Care Connect to see if the process builds enough trust for patients to hire a sitter. Research goals, does the onboarding process make parents feel more confident about finding a sitter? Opportunities and impact. Study overview, pulling some of the key aspects from the study. Participant criteria, key findings, pulling some key quotes from it, getting some insights here, and then a space for some next steps. So the idea of this is I want to create something, even though it's certainly not polished yet. The idea is to get as much as we can from just that research, those results, and then provide some guidelines. Those are the things that aren't working right now, and some tips for you to edit this and craft it how you want. But to give you that initial structure that we discussed today, so you have a starting point, right? Not just having a blank PowerPoint deck and a bunch of interview transcripts. I'm bummed it's not loading the context questions, but regardless, it's a work in progress anyway. I want you guys to test this out. So I see some yeses in the chat. I'll share this with you guys when it's ready to rock, and that'll be soon. And even though it'll be a little rough, it will go really nicely hand in hand with what we talked about here today and give you a head start on all those key tips and key aspects of structuring a good stakeholder presentation. All right, cool. Thank you guys for joining. Some key takeaways: how you communicate and present your research matters. We know that already. The research doesn't speak for itself. Key takeaway number 2, go all the way. Don't just regurgitate what happened in the research. Really take the time to figure out what findings are going to connect with your stakeholders. What are the key things related to business goals? What are going to have the biggest impact on the user? Use those as a guideline to focus on the right stuff and direct stakeholders' attention to the things you want action on. And finally, prove it, don't fight for it. The best way to get resources and budget and time for research is, yes, to be persistent, but also to prove the impact of it. If your stakeholders are tough, don't give buy-in too easily or have a lot of pressure on output and creating new things, launching, shipping new things. Look for ways to and present it and to do research that is going to show a clear impact. Let them learn for themselves that research is going to be an important part of building a good product and maybe avoiding some bad decisions. Again, free credits, I'll put those in here. I'll share those in the chat. I'll share all the stuff in the email after. But if you have a Lyssna account, you can go to that link or click the button in here in contrast and use present 20 to claim it. This is for the first 50 people and it expires next week to claim it. So just do it now and you got them in your account. Did you guys enjoy this workshop? I hope you're feeling like a better, more confident designer or presenter than you were an hour and a half ago. Let me know in the chat if this was helpful. I've got the chat logged, so those of you who expressed interest in being a beta tester for my magic presentation generator, I'm going to follow up on that. But I hope you guys enjoyed this. Hope it was helpful. And thanks for being here. Awesome participation and answers in the chat. So thank you for sharing that with me. And yeah, have a great day, everybody. We got some upcoming workshops I'll share as well, but keep an eye out for the follow-up email and it'll have everything from today. And hopefully I'll see you guys again soon in another workshop. All right. Have a good one, everybody. Take care and talk to you later. See you.